Okay, you're good. And you
Now
know,
I agree to be recorded.
okay.
You hear
right.
me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Good.
So I am going to read this brief reading from Thich Nhat Hanh, which is actually in the hymnal, but I like it. Let us be at peace with our bodies and our minds. Let us return to ourselves and become wholly ourselves. Let us be aware of the source of being common to us all and to all living things. Evoking the presence of the great compassion, let us fill our hearts with our own compassion towards ourselves and towards all living beings. Amen. So I am going to mute myself now, Anita, and you're on.
Okay, hi. I'm glad you all stopped by. I thought I'd stop. My iPad is on top of a pile of books because I usually just have it on my ottoman. And so because I think books tell you a little bit about the person, I thought I'd tell you what they are. They're called, I have 4 books. They're coffee table books: The Joy of Art, Monet; The Artist's Garden, which is about women who did impressionistic paintings; and a book on mythology, which I bought to enhance my poetry writing. I thought I'd begin today to talk just a minute about the pandemic. Not that you really want to hear more, I know, but it kind of left me lost, and I'm sure it did the same thing to many of you, but it really pointed up to me what I had that I lost, and you don't know until you lose it. I felt like that almost my whole life was gone. And I was involved in a number of activities, swimming at the Y, the new Y on Jefferson Road, step dancing at the Pittsford Community Center, church, including doing flowers about once a month, and the art committee, and making cakes for Cafe Veritas. And much of that was gone. Then what do you do? And I had a difficult time adjusting. I still had friends that I kept in touch with. I have a brother who lives in the city, lives in Brighton, about 10 minutes away, and I continued to see them. They included me in their pods, so that was really nice. So I saw them on the holidays. But it was still difficult. My cats, I asked them to join us today. I usually have my little one, Sophie, sitting right next to me, but she declined, and I don't know where Billy is. Maybe he'll show up, but they've been my real stables throughout all of this. So here we are, coming out of the pandemic, thank goodness. And so I thought I'd begin with a little bit of background. My father was born in Denmark. He came to the US in 1926 when he was 18 years old. His mother was a widow. He had been working on a farm when he was 7 years old, taking care of the cows. I can't imagine. I think it was very difficult, but he saved enough money so that he could come to the United States and come through Ellis Island. My mother was born in the US, United States, but all her sisters were born in Denmark. So I think that makes me all Danish. I did do some research on ancestry, and I couldn't find the material, but I think that I had a background in Ireland, Germany, England too. The Irish part fascinates me because I've always been interested in the Celtics, and I understand that the Vikings were in Ireland, so I thought that was a kind of a fascinating connection. I was born in New York City in 1944. My father, when he came over here, he worked on a farm in upstate New York, and he dated my aunts because my mother was way too young. And then he ran into somebody he knew in New York City, and he asked about her. And he met her when she came out from work one day. She was working in a dairy lab. Some man had gone into the war, and so she got his job for a while, and they got married 2 months later. We stayed, my father was in the restaurant business, running things like a White Castle. I don't know if you know what they are. We stayed in New York City for about 1.5 years. My first memory was going to the Bronx Zoo. Then we moved upstate New York, near Cooperstown, Cherry Valley, until they found out that 5 and 20 was going to come in, and the place where they were staying, which was a gas station, he ran a gas station, they sold candy and stuff inside, was going to be built. And so they sold the place and they moved down near Montgomery, New York on 17K. Between Wurtsboro and Newburgh, and they ran a diner called the Collar Bar Diner. My brother was born in 1950. My father shortly left the diner to work on construction. He realized that he didn't have any health insurance or coverage, and he felt that he needed that. My mother had 4 sisters who lived within 100 miles from us. And 2 of them lived in Walton, New York, and 1 lived down near in Westchester County. We saw them frequently, which was really fun. I even went on a trip with them once, and my cousins. We went up to Niagara Falls, and we got lots of trouble. We got in so much trouble that we thought that one of the places that we're staying in was haunted, and then we certainly heard the ghosts in the middle of the night, and my aunts were so irritated at us that they separated us. Let's see. I think an unusual aspect of my family was that my aunts always worked, and to have 4 aunts that were working in the 1950s, I think was quite unusual. One was 2 were beauticians. One was a nurse. She worked in a small private hospital, which was about a block down the road. And my mother was a lab technician. Once they moved to Montgomery, she didn't work as a lab technician because she helped in the restaurant and the diner until later. My father had a heart attack when I was in 6th grade. He was out of work for a long time before he was ready to go back. My mother needed to go back to work. First, she worked in a factory, a terrible factory that made clothes in Montgomery. And then after that, she got a job as a lab technician, which she did until 1976 when they moved to Florida. Like I said, we always had a good time when we got together. And I still see my cousins. We have reunions periodically. And in 2019, my niece Amy and I went down to spend a week with my cousin Linda, and we went into New York City. So I think that it's nice that we've continued to keep that connection. I have my first poem that I wanted to share with you. It's called Gladiolas. It is about the house that my Aunt Louise lived in Walton, New York. I always thought it was a really special house. It was a nice Victorian house, had lots of wood. I will say it was much nicer than the house that I was brought up in. And my aunt, after they, both my Aunt Louise and my Uncle Ross passed away within 6 months, and the house was sold, and it eventually became a restaurant. And so I met my cousin Eric there once, and I wrote this poem about that meeting. Joan and I, my cousin Joan, who also lived in Walton, were standing on the stairs watching as my cousin Bob, a drummer in the Antler Lodge for the summer, returned home to say goodbye to my grandmother. My aunt had insisted she be laid out at her house. So Bestimore, as we called her, was lying in the living room surrounded by gladiolas when Bob went right up and kissed her on the cheek. For 40 years, gladiolas have always reminded me of that moment. The house is now a contemporary Italian restaurant. People eat dinner by the marble fireplace where my grandmother's coffin was placed. Framed pictures of a large Italian family hang on the dark wood panels instead of photos of my family who gathered for a reunion in 1957. All the spirits of my dear departed aunts return to the house, just as I often do in my mind. We sit together on the stairs, wondering why cucumber salad and applesauce cake are not on the menus. And those two things are quite Danish. One other story from that time, my cousin Eric told the story of my Aunt Louise, who was a beautician, had her shop in the basement. And Eric was given piano lessons, which apparently he didn't enjoy too much, but they had a piano, so he got piano lessons. And he would pay my cousin Arnie 5 cents to pound on the piano to pretend he was practicing. And my aunt didn't recognize that, but one day the piano teacher came to have her hair done, and obviously she knew that this was not the tunes that Eric was supposed to be practicing, and Eric got in a lot of trouble. Funny story. So when I finished college, high school, I was encouraged to go to college. This was the early 60s, and I set off to be a teacher. Not so sure that that's really what I wanted to do, but everyone thought that was a good idea, something that I should do. Even though I'd taken one of these aptitude tests in high school, and they said that I should be a civil engineer, but women were not engineers at that time, so I never got to do that. College was a good time. I really loved it. It was the 60s, things were happening. I joined a sorority. I lived in a sorority house. I kind of balanced, having a good time and getting decent grades. After college, I went to Rochester to teach in the city. Why I chose to do that, I had thought about going to the Peace Corps, but I wasn't sure that I wanted to do that. And the new president, John F. Kennedy, had said something like this: ask not what you can do for your country, but ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. So I came to teach in the city. A girl who was brought up with cows across the street and in the backyard was not prepared to teach in the inner city. I can tell you that right now. That lasted 4 years. In the middle of that, I married Ed Jane. Ed had 2 children at the time. I don't think I was prepared to be a stepmother either, and it wasn't that common, so I didn't have a lot of support. But I did that. We saw his kids fairly regularly, and until they moved to Colorado, and then we would go off to Colorado during the summer. But it was difficult. I mean, I only really got to see his kids for once a year. They did move back to Rochester at some point, and then his daughter Melissa graduated from Fairport High School. As far as my own career, after teaching, I did some temporary work, and then the next big job that I got was working at the Unitarian Church, and I started off being Dick Gilbert's administrative assistant, and later became program director. Exactly what I did, I don't. There was just a whole group of different things. But it was an interesting job. I think I learned a lot, and I finally had to decide if that's really what I wanted to continue to do. And I had been at the 1975 Unitarian Universal Association meeting, which was held on Cornell campus, and I loved that campus. And so I decided I wanted to go back to graduate school. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I wanted to go to graduate school. And they had one program connected to ecology, which I was interested in, but it really wasn't too practical to try to go to Cornell and to be married and live in Rochester. So I found a program at RIT, and I started taking courses when I was still working at the church. And then I left there to go to school, and I got a job for the Eco Justice Task Force, which was part of the Center for Religion and Social Policy at Cornell. And so I got to travel a little bit. We met in Seneca Falls in the evening, and every once in a while I got to go to Ithaca, which was fun. My primary responsibility was to promote the curriculum on an ecological lifestyle, and be more environmentally sound. Had a whole bunch of suggestions on how to do that, but Reagan was just elected president. It was the early 80s, and quite honestly, no one was paying much attention to those things at that time. Here we are 40 years later, and we're still having a difficult time. Interesting. After I graduated from RIT, I got a job at Monroe Community College. It was called Women in Technology, and my job was to help recruit women to enter the 2-year technical engineering positions. And in 1980, that was a tough job. Again, there weren't too many women that were interested in doing that. There were women who were interested in computer careers, and I assisted some to do that. But I really liked the job. It had a variety of things that I enjoyed doing. I did some public relations. I did radio ads. I had an advisory committee where different people from the community came in and made suggestions. We had educational panels. I often felt that the people that were meeting, that came to our panels, that were mostly mothers, and they weren't interested in going back and becoming an engineer, but perhaps they encouraged their daughters to do that, because there certainly are more engineers now. We also taught an interesting class. I worked with a math teacher on overcoming math anxiety. So it was really a fun job. It was difficult. Ed bought me a poster that said "Kites Rise Against the Wind," and I hung that in my office. The jobs that I had were always related to grant writing, and so basically what happened was you work the jobs, and then the cycle of money ran out, and then unfortunately, even though you hope that you might find something else at the college, your job ended. And I looked for jobs there, but I didn't quite have the right degree or something. Colleges are very particular about those things. So I my next, and then I had a whole series of jobs that were related to doing special projects. One of them was a collaboration with RIT, where we're helping people to come back and go into their engineering technology certificate programs. Those programs were so expensive, I had a really difficult time encouraging people who were low income to go and borrow a lot of money to go to RIT. Anyhow, that lasted for 4 years, and then I did something else. One of my other jobs that I really liked was I worked with the dislocated workers. It was in the sibling building downtown, and I developed a program to encourage people to change, helping people to change careers, and it was pretty intensive. We met for a couple of weeks. And it was just another really interesting job. Just briefly, I mentioned I worked in jail. So I had to go into the different jails. I worked for the Wayne Finger Lakes Posies. That was interesting, not necessarily the most fun job that I had. But so I can say that I've been in jail in Ontario, which is in Canandaigua, and out in the country at Hopewell. I've been in the Wayne County Jail. That was the other primary jail that I worked in a couple of days a week. And then sometimes I went to jail in Seneca County, in the Seneca County Jail, and also in Penn Yan. So if nothing else, it was an experience. Okay, so that was basically my main careers, and I felt that the kind of jobs that I did were well suited to me, because I get kind of bored, and so when you're forced to change jobs frequently, you're always doing different things and working in different environments, and I really like that. When I worked in the different jails, I drove all through the country, and I could go out and get lost in the country, and no one would pay much attention. And I ate lunch when I was in Canandaigua, on the Canandaigua Pier, and that was really a nice thing to do, especially, well, all year round, but especially when the weather was nice. So that was my career. The other thing that I wanted to mention was the church, because the church played a large part in my life. Ed and I were very involved in a number of things that were very rewarding. I was on the creative, after I worked on the church, at the church, I kind of got a look at everything and thought about, well, what do I really want to do? And one of the things I wanted to do was creative worship. So I was on the creative worship committee. And then Ed decided to do that after he got off the board and the finance committee. And Joanne Goss actually called, who was sick, called and asked Ed if he would be the head of the creative worship committee. And so because he was asked, he said he would do that. And we did that for 10 years. Dick was gracious enough to give us 1 or 2 services a year, and we got together with a group of very talented people and we actually created worship services. We kind of started with some ideas, and then people would go out and play with those ideas and think about them and come back with what they might like to do, or they would write personal stories, and then we would put it all together. And Ed was the one, he was kind of the engineer, and he figured out, how it was all going to come together, and gave everybody a little bit of time and what order that it was going to be in. And I dealt with the creative parts, what people were going to say, how it sounded, what other kinds of things that we needed. And it was a really rewarding and a good thing to do. And the other thing was in 1986, when General Assembly was held, and was held in Rochester, at the University of Rochester. We were asked to be the volunteer chairs, and what that did was we got to go to General Assembly. We were asked to come to General Assembly when it was held in Atlanta. We stayed in that very luxurious round hotel, the Peachtree Inn, for like 8 days, and ate across the street at these really great restaurants. And so that was great fun. And then, of course, when it came to Rochester, we had to work, and that was quite enlightening. I thought about the one thing that I learned from all of that was when you work with the press and they put out stories about what's going on, you got to be very careful because they're not always right. And every time the newspaper article would come out, there was one thing that the information had sort of been distorted. And it was quite an education to kind of actually see that, to be involved and then read what they wrote about it. So I would say that the church was a central part of my marriage to Ed, because it really kind of provided a place for us to go and a place for us to be, and really helped to hold it together. I don't know. I mean, we had other things in common. We really loved to travel and, took trips together, but the church was really important. Okay, my next poem, which I'm going to do, I will skip that one. Okay, the next one is about my marriage song account, personal. In uncharted territory, we walk aimlessly through the exhibition tents. He has to decide if he's going with her or staying with me. I have to decide whether to attempt to save the marriage or to let him go. Lost and confused, we wander into the amusement area. Neither of us wants to ride the tilt-a-whirl or go on the Ferris wheel. My sneakers' rubber bottom rips open and my soul drags along the path. Looking for a new view, we drive along the shoreline, stop at a spit of land, recline from a swamp, and glance back at the city skyline. Later, side by side, we lean against the rail at the end of the pier and stare at the sailboats keeling in the wind. We do not want to go home. So after my marriage, after we were separated, I had a difficult time because I wasn't sure what I felt as if that, although I know it's, not necessarily true, but the way that I felt was that we belonged to the church as a couple. And I wasn't sure, not being coupled anymore, exactly where I fit in. And so I kind of withdrew for a while. Actually, then, and did other kinds of things. And I'm happy to say that after a while, I finally figured out the kinds of things that I like to do, and they're the things that I was doing when the pandemic came, being on the art committee and doing the flowers once in a while and making cakes. So, I'm glad that I was able to do that after a while. So in 2002, my job, the managers changed where I was working at the Career Center, which had moved, and the nature of what we're doing had changed. And so I lost my job, as things happen when there are changes in management. And so I started doing a number. I wasn't quite ready to retire. I looked for jobs. I interviewed at Penn State, which was fun, but colleges are very interesting. They have very clear ideas of the balance that they want on their staff, and they already had 2 or 3 blonde women my age, and so I think they hired someone else to make it a more diverse. And I understand that, and yet when you want, when you might want the job, it's not always easy. But I did a number of things that I wanted to do. There were two jobs that I always thought would be interesting. Not that I would make a lot of money, but I got a chance to do them. I wanted to work in a flower shop, and after so I got a job working at the flower shop in Pittsford. I did that went on for a year. And I found out that it was really, I hate to say this, but it was really almost slave labor. After having a professional job, I was making $7.25 an hour. And after 6 months, I asked for a 25-cent raise, and I was refused. However, I learned a lot about flowers, and now every time when I go into Trader Joe's to buy roses, I feel the bottom of the roses, because you want nice hard ones because they last much longer. And my favorite part of that job was to helping people pick out bouquets of flowers from the place where they were stored under refrigeration behind glass. And we built bouquets, not the ones that they made in the back, but bouquets that they could take home, and that was really fun. And then the other thing that I wanted to do was I wanted to work in a clothing store, another one of those sort of menial tasks, but I just wondered what that was like. And I found out what it was like. It's spending a lot of time folding clothes. And so now whenever I go in and look at clothes, I'm very careful that I put it back together again, and they don't have to do a lot of rearranging after I leave. And I got a nice discount on clothes. So I inquired, when I worked at Coldwater Creek and J. Jill at Christmas time, and I enhanced my wardrobe, shall we say. Okay, so like I said, I did a number of things, and in 2011, I worked as an adjunct at MCC. I wondered what teaching at college was like, but sometimes it's tough. They just kind of give you the class and they give you the book. You got to figure out most of the rest of the stuff by yourself. In 2011, I decided that I'd had enough with all of this, and I decided to retire. And so then I kind of had to figure out what I wanted to do and what else I wanted to do. And actually, I accumulated a lot of hobbies that were quite fun. I'd always been interested in photography. My friend Gail was doing photography. I started to do some photography. I got this little camera. I took some photos. One of them was used. I wonder where it is. I'm going to look for it. 1 second. Excuse me. Yes. One of them was used as the cover on my poetry group anthology. I think probably, I hate to say this, but this is probably the best picture I ever took. It's from my trip to Denmark, and it's in a tower that slants up. And so you go around and around, and I just happened to be there when the light was just right. So that was really fun. So I did a little photography. I wrote poems. I always wanted to write, and I thought that I wanted to write mystery stories. And I even found a character, and I was reading other series of mystery stories. I was going to be Veronica Flowers, and I was going to work in a flower shop, and then I would have contact to all of these people that somehow got murdered. It sounded to me like a good place to be. There are lots of other series where someone's a cook. They live different places, and so then there can be a continuing source of murders and mysteries. But I went to, I think it was in 2002 or one or two, I went to a writer's workshop on Cape Cod, Craigsville Beach. And what I learned during that was that I really did not want to write mystery stories, because mystery stories had lots of details in them. And the people who wrote mystery stories were very fanatic, and if everything wasn't put together correctly, or made sense to them, they surely told you. And since I'm not a detailed person, I kind of changed my mind and thought that I would try poetry because I wanted to write something that was closer to my heart. Excuse me, I gotta get a little water. I'm losing my voice here. So I became involved in the poetry community. They were starting a new poetry group and called Just Poets. And so I became active in that. I was on the board as secretary. I was president one year. Whole variety of different kinds of things. And I wrote poems, and I read poems. Did poetry readings out in the community, and enjoyed it. I find that I've been on a dry spell. I have to go places, or something has to happen. I have to have something really draw my attention, and then a poem comes out of it. My little cat Sophie, an example. My little cat Sophie, I came out one day and she was looking at something, and I thought it was one of her mouses, and I thought it turned out to be a bird. It was very awful, but that became a poem. And the bird, actually, I took it out and I dropped it on the balcony. Its wings fluttered and it landed on a bush, and when I came back, it flew away. So that story has a nice ending, which are the kind of stories that I like. So I did poetry. Let's see what else. Oh, I make jewelry, all kinds of jewelry. I couldn't find the necklace that matched my scarf, but can you see my, yeah, mostly stringing things. But I made that bracelet. That's kind of fun, and I find the making the jewelry is like a meditation, or I think of it as the rosary, because you have to put those beads on very carefully. Sometimes you have to count them for the designs. You have to really pay attention, and that's all you can do. So I find it very enjoyable. Let's see what else. Oh, and now I seem to be into art. I went to an art conference at Omega Institute. I had always wanted to go to Omega, which is a conference center, a large conference center, and down in Rhinebeck, New York. And so I went one year and took a collage course with Jane Davies, and have since I took one last fall. That's last spring. That's the first thing that I did last April after my life fell apart, was I signed up to take a Zoom art course on collages. And I signed up and took a course this March. After like 4 years, I finally figured out, I got some sense of what I was doing. When I went to Omega, everybody seemed to know what they were doing, and the teacher is such that you have to sort of figure it out for yourself. I had a difficult doing that, but I did, and it was lots of fun. The other thing that I like to do is travel. I went to Cairn, gave a sermon, I think it was in 2006, on, sometimes you just have to grab things and do what you want to do. And the one thing that I'd always wanted to do was go to Denmark. Had an opportunity to go when I graduated from college. I could either get money towards a new car, or I could go to Denmark with my mother and my brother. Well, as a college student going, as a college graduate, I'm sorry, but that didn't really appeal to me too much. So I took the money for the car, and so I went to Denmark. I had decided when my marriage fell apart that the first thing I did was take a trip to Maine to see Pitsy Russell. I don't know, she used to be here, and she became a minister, and she was living in Portland, Maine. And so I went to see her, and I spent a night by myself in Massachusetts at the Stockbridge Inn, and no, the Red Lion Inn it was, which was really tough because my marriage had just ended. But I decided if there was something I really, really wanted to do, even if I had to do it by myself, I would do it. And so I I went to Denmark by myself. I knew some people over there, but I was by myself most of the time. But it was really fun. I lived in the city. I picked out some place that was walking distance. I walked all over Copenhagen, and I'm really glad that I did it. The other thing that I did was I went to Oregon. I had a cousin who lived in Portland, Oregon. I'm sorry, Portland. And I always wanted to drive the Oregon coast, so I rented a car and drove down the coast and spent a night along the coast. So, anything else? I think basically those are the oh, the other thing that I'm in, which is kind of strange. I have this very strange habit of, I don't know if it's strange, but I collect vintage sheets. I'm allergic to new sheets because they have formaldehyde on it, and it makes me all itchy. And so I could either use organic sheets, which are sometimes expensive. I decided to check out vintage sheets. I figured if they were old, they'd been washed lots of times, and they were indeed. There's a couple of groups on Facebook, and so I have a very large collection, probably more than I need, of vintage sheets, and it becomes an art project because the top and the bottom don't match, and so you have to put it all together. So I get to make my own collage for my bed every week, which I enjoy, except I'm going to have to sell some of those sheets. Well, I think that the time has passed. I have one poem to finish off, and then you can ask questions, because I'm sure there's lots of blanks here.
I would love to ask questions, Anita, because I'm going to take the spotlight off you. I'm sorry, what?
Just one last poem.
Good. Okay. That was one of the things I was going to ask.
Yeah. I wanted to read this poem. This poem was written on Cape Cod, one of my favorite places to go. I read it after I'd taken actually a trip with myself for a few days to Cape Cod, stayed in B&B. I think this was from Nauset Beach. Pummeled together in cascading waves, the rounded rocks spilled to sandy shore to bask in sun before being swept by ebb and flow back to sea. Some inexplicable longing has called me here to walk along the ocean. I wandered down the beach, picking up washed, wet stones, rub them between my fingers, feel the soft edges, admire the gray rust and lavender colors. Alone on the beach, I pray, may life's turbulence transform me, smooth, luminescent as beach stones, until at last I am worn into a grain of sand, ready to be windswirled to dune where grass and oats will root and grow again. Thank you.
Oh. You are really a Renaissance woman, aren't you? You just.
I don't think of myself as that, but maybe I am.
But you have such a variety of interests and accomplishments, and I'm going to open it for questions because I'm sure there are some. If you have a question, you can type it in the chat or raise your hand or go to reactions and put your hand up there, which takes you to the top of my screen. So it makes it easier for me to know who's got their hand up. But while we're, I was curious about a lot of things. One being that your aptitude test was for engineering, and you ended up going to RIT at some point, which I thought was really, but also I wondered if you started coming to the Unitarian Church because of working there for Dick, or if you worked there after you had started.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. When we were first married, we lived over in Highland Avenue on the entrance to the park there, Highland Park, the one that goes up the hill, whatever it's called. Yes, and we used to walk all over the city. We used to walk past the church, kind of curious what those two churches were, those kinds of things. And then we found an ad in Harper's Magazine, I think, about if you such and such, then you might be a UU. And so we started coming, and it was like in the interim between Bob West, and there were all these different ministers there, and we were kind of confused. But then Dick Gilbert came, and then we stayed and became involved. And that, I worked there. We went there like 2 years before I got the job.
Ah, okay.
Yep. I forgot to mention the other thing that happened during the pandemic was that I learned that Ed passed away, and that was, even though we've been divorced a long time, it was still sad, because you kind of go back over and review everything that's gone on in your life and our times together. Yeah.
I'm waiting to see if anybody else is. Auntie said, when you were working in prisons, what were you doing?
Oh, yeah. I was running a transition program to help the inmates think about what kind of legal work that they wanted to do when they were released. We wrote resumes. We talked about career planning. And then I had the opportunity to take the training for something called Action for Choice, I think. And it was a sort of lay program to help people understand how your mind works and how you can make changes in your life. And so that was really interesting. I worked with one of the prison guards there that was really interested in doing that. So those are basically the things that I did.
Your career was a lot more like young people nowadays. I'm always astonished at how often the young people I know change jobs, but the older folks tended to hang in.
Right. Yes, he changed, which, like I said, was really, even though it was frustrating because I always had to look for jobs when they ended, and my salary didn't progress really high because it sort of went back in, just a little bit above. And I didn't make that much money. It was fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was, that part of it was real suitable to me.
I was just going to say, it sounds like it suited you to change often.
It did. It
to
really
do
did.
New things and different things.
Exactly.
Yeah. When did you start writing poetry?
I started writing poetry actually at the same time as I was thinking about mystery. I always thought I also started to think about writing poetry, and I wrote one about getting back into the dating world. And I had a couple of them, but just a couple of poems. And then I decided that that's really what I wanted to do. Or I wanted to spend more time doing that.
Yeah. I'm really glad that you shared some of them with us. It really is meaningful. And I love the way you wove me into this story.
Thank you. Yeah.
Jack and Sandy Maniloff asked, did you write any poetry during the pandemic?
I didn't write a lot of poetry. I was really stuck. I became really addicted to morning TV. I was really lucky that I didn't gain more than, 2 or 3 pounds. I figured that was my big accomplishment, that I did not. And it took me a while to sort of get myself going and taking the art and that kind of stuff. And I wrote it, but nothing about the pandemic. Most of these poems were written from a distance. The one about my divorce on the pier in Toronto, that wasn't written, until maybe 7 or 8 years after that. So, sometimes, there might be some poems about the pandemic, but I'll need to have a little distance for that to happen. Yeah. I was looking for a poem. Oh, I do have one more poem. If nobody has any questions, maybe I can read that one if you'd like.
Well, let's
Oh,
use the poem as the final.
Sure, that's fine. That's good. Yeah, that's great.
I like that.
Good.
No, I mean, I'm saying go ahead now and read the poem, and that'll be our final farewell for the morning, because it's 11 o'clock.
Okay.
Time flies.
Well, I didn't think I would have enough, and obviously I did, because I was sort of, cutting things out as I went along. So that's good. It worked out well for me. This poem is called First Kiss. It takes place on the porch of the house that became the restaurant, this house that I really liked. I think maybe it happened, but I'm not positive. Poems kind of draw, pull together different elements. The sweet fragrance of Nicodemia hangs in the muggy air. Jimmy, the kid next door, sits next to me on the porch swing. As we sway back and forth, Kathy's clown plays on the portable radio. A silly smile crosses Jimmy's lips. The swing creaks. I cringe, willing it to be silent, not wanting to be heard by Uncle Ross and Cousin Eric watching TV inside. I stifle a giggle whisper. Lick the abracadabra from my lips. Jimmy blushes, places a hand on my waist, pulls me towards him. Unsure what to do, I close my eyes, hold my breath, tilt my head, just like Doris Day. His lips touch mine, my lips touch his. One firefly across the street flickers. He backs away as the porch light turns on.
Oh, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
This has been a wonderful, wonderful morning.
Thank you for
see
the
you all
opportunity.
in 2 weeks, not next week, okay? Have a wonderful day, Barb. I'll see you in an hour or so, depending on how long it takes me to get going. Bye, everybody. Thank you, Anita.
No, thank you. I appreciate the opportunities too.
It's great.